I knew the scent before I saw her orange blossom and pepper the fragrance Tessa wore when she wanted the room to notice she had arrived. It drifted ahead of the click of her heels, slid across the hotel ballroom, and reached me where I stood pretending to enjoy the view of the river. My fingers circled the stem of a glass I wasn't drinking, steadying the tremor I wouldn't let anyone else see. Mark laughed somewhere behind me, a low, easy sound I had once trusted, followed by Tessa's bright reply that made strangers turn their heads. I didn't turn yet. I watched the chandelier catch in the glass and thought about vows, about friendship bracelets braided on a dorm floor, about how quickly loyalty can be pawned when someone thinks no one is watching. The band shifted to a slow number, the kind people sway to when they think they're safe, and I finally set the glass down. Before I continue, tell me in the comments where you're listening from, and if this kind of quiet justice speaks to you. Please like and subscribe so more people can find these stories. My name is Elena, and I grew up in a small town outside Omaha where people waved from porches and borrowed sugar without a second thought. My mother taught second grade and believed in fixing what you could and praying over what you couldn't, while my father ran a bait shop and came home smelling like the river and hope. I was the peacemaker between two older brothers, the one who learned to listen first and talk second, which is probably why I became a school counselor who knows when a teenager's silence is a shelter and when it's a warning. I carried those habits with me when I moved east after grad school, telling myself that a steadier life waited beyond flat fields and long winters. I met Mark at a college friend's backyard barbecue in Raleigh, a July evening that hummed with cicadas and warm beer. He was sunburned at the nose and charming without trying, the kind of man who remembered names and poured someone else a drink before pouring his own. He liked to say he was good at reading rooms. He could spot the decision maker, the skeptic, and the person who needed to laugh to buy. With me, he said he didn't need to read, he could rest, and I believed him so fully it felt like a cool hand on the back of my neck. We married in a white church with creaky pews and honeymooned in Asheville, where we promised each other we'd come back every fall to watch the leaves burn the hills gold. Tessa arrived in our life a year later, like a second summer, louder and brighter than the first. We'd known each other in college, different dorms, same campaigns, shared study tables when the library stayed open too late, and slid back into an easy shorthand, the kind that made our husbands joke we had a secret language. She built a career designing upscale fundraisers and signature weddings. She knew every florist worth their thorns and could tame a ballroom with a seating chart. I admired the way she moved, all confident angles and quick decisions, and she admired my patience, or said she did, as if my quiet were a talent she borrowed when hers ran thin. We traded dinners and favors, playlists and recipes every exchange, weaving her more firmly into our home. Our house on Sycamore Lane was the kind that kept a list on the fridge and a bowl for keys by the door. Weeknights started with Lily's updates about college applications and ended with Mark's sports recaps and Tessa's texts about centerpieces that needed opinions right now. On Fridays, we hosted neighbors with pulled pork or salmon depending on who had coupons, and when money was tight, we pretended it wasn't by lighting candles. Mark talked about moving up to regional VP, and I saved for a week in Door County my mother had always wanted but never took. It was a good life, the kind that hums steadily enough that you don't notice when something vital starts to slip out of tune. The first snag was small enough to ignore the way most trouble asks permission before it enters. Tessa teased me at a dinner about how trusting I was, how a man like Mark could charm his way out of a bank vault, and everyone laughed because she delivered the line with a smile and a sip of wine. Later, when we were cleaning the kitchen, I asked Mark if the joke was aimed, and he kissed my forehead and said, "She flirts with everyone. That's her currency, don't spend it twice." I let it go, and I wish I could say I let it go, because I was noble. But the truth is, gentler and more dangerous. I wanted peace, more than I wanted answers. Peace is easy to stage when you're the one setting the table. Money became a conversation spoken in different dialects. Mark liked big gestures, a surprise weekend in Savannah, a watch that meant nothing but looked like everything while I liked the quiet arithmetic of watching a balance grow. He joked that I made romance spreadsheets, and I joked that he made spreadsheets disappear, and between the jokes, we wrote a truce. Tessa landed a lucrative corporate gala and marked the occasion by bringing over her signature orange blossom cake, the one that tastes like summer persuading spring to stay a little longer. She hugged me in the doorway while Lily took a photo of us laughing, and later, when I scrolled past that picture, I couldn't unsee how my husband's eyes followed her hands. There were other small things. Then Mark switched to a sharper cologne and started leaving his phone face down on the counter, and Tessa's jokes grew barbed in ways only I could feel. Lily noticed the silence I wore to bed and asked if I was mad at her. I told her I was tired, which was true, but only in the way a storm cloud is heavy. My father-in-law, Walter, stopped by one afternoon with leftover cedar planks and a list of projects he thought would make the deck last another 10 years. "Things last when someone cares for them," he said, sanding a rail smooth with hands that had built other people's roofs, and I nodded like the lesson was about wood. A night in late September brought a breeze that smelled like the first chill, just enough to make the curtains lift and sigh. Mark texted he would be late end of quarter something with the team, and Tessa sent a photo from a venue walkthrough, all marble stairs and borrowed light. I brewed tea and answered college essay drafts while the house settled around me the way it does when it wants you to believe you're safe. Then I heard it, the soft clack of the back gate that never moved on its own, followed by a shape that crossed the kitchen window, and a laugh that didn't belong to my daughter. I set my cup down without a sound and walked toward the hall, and that was the moment the air in our home changed temperature. The back gate swung just enough for the latch to miss its mark, and in that small sound, I felt something shift inside me. Mark was supposed to be at work, but his car sat in the driveway. I walked quietly through the kitchen, my breath caught between calm and panic, and stopped just before the hall turned toward the living room. The voices drifted clear, hers lilting and teasing, his answering low and comfortable in a way that was once mine. I didn't need to see them to know. When I finally leaned enough to look, Tessa sat perched on the arm of our couch, her legs draped across my husband's lap as though she belonged there. I froze, the sight pressing against me harder than any blow. His hand rested casually on her knee, his wedding ring catching the glow of the lamp, and she leaned down to touch his face, as if she were straightening something that had never been hers to fix. Their laughter was soft and conspiratorial, like children stealing from a jar they swore they'd never open. "You think she suspects anything?" Tessa asked, her voice almost playful. Mark chuckled, sipping from the glass he held. "Elena? No, she trusts us too much. She's buried in work." That word, trust, lodged itself inside me like a nail. I stepped back before they could notice me, every nerve in my body screaming to act, to shout, to rip the moment apart. Instead, I walked out as quietly as I had entered, slipping through the gate and around to my car. I drove 3 blocks before I pulled over, my hands shaking against the steering wheel, the smell of their wine still clinging to my clothes. Tears came, but not the soft kind. These were harsh, hot tears that felt more like fire than grief, and I let them fall until they burned out. I didn't storm back into that house or confront them on the spot. They would have spun it into a misunderstanding, a joke, or worse, made me seem small. That night, I checked into a modest hotel near downtown using my business card. I lay in the dark, with the television humming low, staring at the ceiling as the air conditioner clicked on and off. My phone sat heavy in my hand. I could have called Tessa. I could have demanded an explanation from Mark. But they had already answered everything I needed to know. They weren't ashamed. They were confident enough to laugh about me inside my own home. That realization settled over me with a strange calm. They thought I was blind, and that meant I still had a choice. When I returned the next morning, Mark greeted me like nothing had shifted. He kissed me on the cheek as if he had spent the night alone asking about my plans for the day while buttering toast. His casualness was its own betrayal. Later, Tessa texted me a photo of a floral arrangement she was considering for a client, followed by a message that read, "Miss our coffee dates." Soon, the audacity of it made my stomach twist. But I responded with a smiley face, and next week works, because the best mask is the one no one suspects is there. For the next several days, I studied them carefully. I noticed how Mark always kept his phone face down, how he suddenly showered before dinner. Even if he claimed to have gone to the gym, how his laughter with me sounded rehearsed. I noticed how Tessa's jokes about me grew sharper, small barbs hidden beneath a laugh that dared me to call her on it. Once, at a small gathering, she leaned across the table and teased that I was too trusting that Mark could get away with anything. Everyone laughed, and I forced myself to laugh too, but the truth of it stung like salt on raw skin. I replayed every detail from the night I saw them dissecting the words, the gestures, the ease of it all. This wasn't a mistake born of weakness or a passing lapse. This was a routine. They had rehearsed it, built it, made it strong enough to last beneath my nose. They believed my silence was ignorance, and that assumption gave me something far stronger than rage. It gave me time. The turning point came when I overheard them again, this time without meaning to. I had stayed home from work answering emails from the upstairs office when I heard the front door open and the familiar rhythm of Tessa's heels against the floor. I stayed still as their voices floated down the hallway. "She'll never know," Tessa laughed. "She's not the type to look too closely." Mark's reply was quieter, but sharp in its cruelty. "That's what makes it work. She's useful." My hands curled into fists so tight I felt my nails press into my palms. Useful, not loved, not respected. Useful. They left minutes later, their laughter lingering like smoke, and I sat alone in my office until the silence pressed too hard against my ears. That was the moment my sorrow hardened into resolve. They thought they could drain me of time, trust, and money, and I would simply fold. But instead, I decided to wait to watch and to build something they could never see coming. At dinner that night, Mark spoke about a new client meeting, his fork cutting neatly through his steak as if the world were steady. I smiled, nodded, and asked him questions the way any wife might. He didn't notice the edge had shifted, didn't notice the distance in my eyes. He kissed me goodnight and fell asleep within minutes, his breathing slow and even. I lay beside him, wide awake, staring at the ceiling. That was when I knew. If they wanted a game, I would learn the rules better than they had ever imagined. The house was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the steady rhythm of his sleep. I turned on my side and studied his profile in the dim light. This was the man I had trusted with my whole life, and yet his every breath now felt like a lie. I didn't want apologies or excuses. I wanted something that would last longer than tears. I wanted them to understand the cost of what they had taken. And in that dark silence, a new version of myself began to form, one that was patient, deliberate, and unflinching. The first cracks of betrayal had shown themselves, and with them came a decision I could never take back. What they didn't know was that every word, every look, and every slip was already becoming part of the story I would one day tell. And as I lay in the dark, listening to the quiet of my own home, I understood something they hadn't. The sweetest revenge doesn't come quickly. It waits. And so did I. The days after I chose silence instead of confrontation felt heavy, like walking with stones in my pockets. I went through the motions of life, commuting to school, listening to students pour out their small crises, smiling through conversations at the grocery store. But under it all, there was a dull roar I couldn't quiet. At home, I became an actress in my own living room. Mark kissed me goodnight and asked about my day, and I answered softly, careful not to let my voice crack. Tessa texted about flowers, fundraisers, and dresses, and I responded as though nothing between us had shifted. On the outside, I remained the same wife and friend I had always been. Inside, I was unraveling thread by thread. Sleep became my enemy. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator and the whistle of air through the vent, waiting for the darkness to thicken into something I could hide in. When Mark's breathing turned even beside me, I let tears fall quietly into the pillow. The kind of tears you don't want anyone to see because they make you feel too small. I thought of Lily down the hall, trusting her world was steady. I thought of Walter still sanding the deck rails, believing his son had built a marriage worth protecting. And I thought of my own parents, both gone now, who had taught me to trust that love and loyalty were the bedrock of a family. The weight of all that trust wasted and broken made my chest ache in ways words couldn't describe. At work, I caught myself zoning out while students spoke. A girl told me about a fight with her mother, and I nodded, while in my mind, I was back in the kitchen doorway, watching Tessa drape herself across Mark, as if my home were her stage. Guilt washed over me for letting my own pain distract me from children who needed me, so I started staying later at school, burying myself in paperwork. It was easier to focus on transcripts and applications than to face the silence waiting at home. I told Mark the district was cracking down on deadlines, and he didn't question it. He was relieved, I think, to have more space to slip away. There were moments when anger bubbled up sharp and hot. One Saturday morning, I caught Mark humming while he flipped pancakes, the same song Tessa loved to play at her parties. I nearly slammed the plate out of his hands, but instead, I excused myself to the bedroom and pressed a pillow over my face until the fury passed. Later, I smiled as though nothing had touched me because I knew if I let my anger spill too soon, it would be wasted. They thrived on the idea that I was too trusting to see too soft to act. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of knowing how deeply they had cut me. Still, the grief was constant. In quiet moments, I found myself grieving not just the betrayal, but the life I had believed in. The lazy Saturdays, the family vacations, the years of laughter I thought were ours alone. Every memory felt stolen, tarnished by the knowledge that while I held them close, Mark and Tessa had already been weaving their lies. There were nights I sat at the kitchen table with old photo albums, running my finger over the glossy surface of our smiles, asking myself how many of those days were real and how many were staged. I kept my pain tucked away, showing only the polished surface to others. Even to Lily. She was busy with college essays and basketball practice, and I didn't want to fracture her last year at home with truths too heavy for her shoulders. When she asked me one evening if I was feeling sick, I kissed her forehead and said I was just tired. She accepted the answer, and I hated myself a little for letting her live in a lie, but I told myself I was protecting her. She didn't need to carry this weight before she left for the next chapter of her life. The silence between Mark and me grew. We still shared meals, still laughed at sitcom reruns, still hosted neighbors, but the connection that had once been seamless now felt like a script we both pretended to know by heart. His eyes avoided mine more often, his phone never far from reach. Sometimes I wondered if he saw my distance too, if he sensed that I was no longer the blind, trusting wife he relied on. But he said nothing, and I stayed quiet, and the gap widened day by day. The hardest part was pretending with Tessa. She dropped by one evening with a casserole, claiming she had made too much for herself. We stood in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I had once heard her laughter dripping with betrayal, and she told me about a client's winter gala, as if nothing had changed. I forced a smile, thanked her for the food, and listened while she rattled on about sequins and centerpieces. Every word tasted like poison, but I kept my face still. She hugged me before she left, pressing her perfume into my sweater, and I stood frozen until the door closed behind her. Then I hung the sweater in the back of the closet where I wouldn't smell her again. Alone, I let the tears come again, heavy and relentless. They weren't the cleansing kind. They were bitter, almost metallic in taste, and they left me hollow rather than lighter. I cried for the girl I had been in college braiding friendship bracelets with Tessa, promising each other we'd always be sisters. I cried for the woman who believed in Mark so completely that she never thought to guard her heart. And I cried for the life that had already ended even as it looked perfectly intact from the outside. The pain became my constant shadow, but slowly it changed shape. It hardened into something sharper, less fragile. I began to understand that my silence was not just a wound, but a weapon. They thought I was broken. They thought I was blind. They thought they had already won. And that belief was the one advantage I had left. But in those early weeks before the plan began to take form, I was still deep in the grief. Every night I lay awake rehearsing conversations that never happened, picturing confrontations I didn't yet have the strength to stage. Each morning I woke with swollen eyes and painted on a steady face for the world. It was survival, but it wasn't living. The night that sealed my resolve came quietly without spectacle. Mark had fallen asleep in front of the television, his phone buzzing on the table beside him. I glanced at it, the screen lighting up with a message that needed no name. I didn't read the words, but the curve of my mouth tightened into something close to a smile. I finally understood the tears, the doubt, the silence, all of it had been leading me here. What they thought was my weakness would become the soil where something far stronger grew. The grief wasn't over, but it had carried me to the edge of something new. Soon, I wouldn't just be surviving. I would be watching, waiting, and building. And though they didn't know it yet, every careless laugh and every whispered word was already part of the foundation of their undoing. The morning I knew I had changed started like any other. I poured Lily's coffee while she checked her phone, the two of us moving in that quiet rhythm we'd settled into since she started her senior year. The light coming through the kitchen window was soft, a kind of early autumn haze, and Mark was already gone off to some meeting with the Atlanta team, he'd said. Lily grabbed her thermos and kissed my cheek, and I watched her walk out the door, her ponytail swaying with each step. I waited until her car backed out of the driveway, then turned and walked straight to the drawer where Mark kept our old receipts and house files. My hand didn't shake. I wasn't looking for proof of the affair anymore. I had already seen more than enough. What I wanted now was leverage patterns, habits gaps I could use. The drawer held years of casual lies, hotel invoices labeled as conferences, gas station receipts that didn't line up with the mileage on his car, and dry cleaning tickets for clothes I'd never seen. I gathered what I needed, slid it all into a manila envelope, and tucked it into the back of my closet behind a stack of photo albums. That night, I lay beside him as he slept, the faint hum of the ceiling fan steady above us. I turned on my side and watched his chest rise and fall, calm and untroubled. I wondered if he ever thought about the risk, if he knew how thin the ice was beneath him. Probably not. He was too used to being trusted, too sure I would never be the kind of woman who looked too closely. The next week, Tessa invited me to lunch. She picked a bistro downtown, the kind with white linen napkins and flatbread menus. She ordered sparkling water and a chopped salad, and I nodded through stories about demanding clients and a florist who'd backed out at the last minute. Then she leaned in, chin in hand, and said, "You know, Elena, if I ever find someone like Mark, I'll never let him go." She said it like a joke, but her eyes held still on mine, watching. I smiled gently and folded my napkin. "Well, I said good men are hard to find." Her expression didn't shift, but I saw it in the tightness at the corners of her mouth. She didn't expect me to play along. When I got home that afternoon, I opened my laptop and created a folder. I labeled it plainly household records and started scanning documents. Receipts, schedules, copies of texts I'd quietly taken screenshots of when Mark left his phone unattended. I didn't let myself feel much as I worked. It wasn't rage anymore. It was resolve, like packing for a long trip you don't talk about until the day you leave. At dinner, Mark brought up Tessa's gala, said she was working on a big event for a local hospital board. He asked if I'd be willing to help review the auction list. "You've always had a good eye for these things." I smiled and nodded, passing him the salad bowl. The irony didn't touch him. He still believed he was in control. That was the most dangerous lie of all. Lily noticed the shift in me before anyone else. One evening, while we were folding laundry in the den, she looked up and said, "You've been quiet lately, Mom." "Not sad, just quiet?" I shrugged and told her I was just tired from work. She nodded slowly but didn't press. I think she knew I was holding something I couldn't hand to her. And I was. I needed her to finish her senior year without shadows, without suspicion, without the kind of scars that come from watching love break in front of you. Mark's travel increased that month, Charlotte-Miami, back-to-back overnight trips that never came with receipts or photos. He stopped asking me if I needed anything before he left. Maybe he thought he didn't have to anymore. One night, while he was out, I drove to the public library across town and printed copies of everything. It felt safer that way. One envelope I mailed to my cousin Melanie in Illinois, sealed with a note, "Hold for me. Don't ask questions yet." The other I stored in the trunk of my car, beneath the spare tire. Walter stopped by one Saturday morning to check on a plumbing issue in the upstairs bathroom. He didn't say much, just worked quietly while I made tea. Before he left, he stood in the doorway and said, "Everything all right with you two?" His voice was soft, but direct. I smiled and told him we were both just busy. He watched me a second longer, then nodded. "Busy can be good," he said. "Just don't let it become distance." I closed the door after him and stood there for a long time, listening to the wind move through the trees in the backyard. One afternoon, I visited Tessa's office unannounced. I brought a sample binder for centerpieces, pretending to want her input for the upcoming PTA banquet. Her assistant, a cheerful young woman named Bree, waved me into the main room, where I watched Tessa take a call with her back half-turned. I stood still until she hung up, then smiled as if I'd only just arrived. She blinked and covered it quickly, but the surprise was real. I stayed only 15 minutes, but I left with what I needed: her schedule for the week, printed neatly on a whiteboard behind her desk, and a note in her planner: Mark, Friday, 11:30, Caraway Inn. Back home, I stared at the note and marked the day. I didn't follow them. I didn't need to. That would come later when the ground was more solid beneath me. For now, I collected. Each date, each hotel, each call that rang twice before being declined. I kept them all. The silence between Mark and me widened like a seam pulling loose, but still he didn't ask. Still he smiled and touched my back in passing, and still I let him. The last piece fell into place when Lily handed me a flyer from school, an end-of-year banquet for senior families hosted at a new event hall just outside town. She asked if we could go, and I told her of course. I looked at the sponsor list and saw Tessa's company logo printed at the bottom in soft gold script. I smiled, folded the flyer, and placed it in my desk drawer. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of timing. That night, I lay in bed listening to the quiet click of Mark's laptop keys in the den. I stared at the ceiling, letting the pieces arrange themselves. The lies had stopped hurting. The grief had dried up. What remained was something still and sharpened like glass, waiting beneath a calm surface. I didn't know how long it would take or how many steps remained, but I knew one thing with complete certainty. I didn't mark a single day on the calendar, but I knew exactly when the shift began. It was quiet. It started with how I poured my coffee in the morning, how I chose silence over small talk, how I timed my smiles around Mark's movements. He didn't notice, or if he did, he mistook it for distraction. That was fine with me. A distracted woman isn't a dangerous one. He still kissed my cheek before leaving for client meetings, and I still waved from the porch like everything was ordinary. He was so confident in the performance he'd choreographed, he never noticed mine had changed. The first move was simple. I created a separate bank account in my name, only one he couldn't trace. I didn't drain anything from our joint accounts yet, but I slowly stopped letting money flow through them. Refunds from school fees, vendor payments from side projects. Even the reimbursement checks I sometimes received from the district, I redirected them all. I updated passwords, I archived statements. I called a lawyer not to file anything, but to ask a quiet string of questions about community property and marital fraud. On a Wednesday afternoon, I walked into a camera shop 2 towns over. I told the clerk I was testing out surveillance options for a friend's Airbnb and asked about discreet interior setups. He showed me a few things, including a motion-activated unit that looked exactly like a plug-in air freshener. I bought 2 and paid in cash. One I placed in the living room facing the couch, and the other went in my office aimed at the hallway. Just in case they ever used the house when they thought I was gone. I told Mark I was testing smart security systems for a friend at work. He didn't ask a single follow-up question. The hardest part was smiling through my interactions with Tessa. She stopped by more often now, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with work samples she claimed she needed my eye on. I let her talk. I listened. I even offered feedback. I was careful not to act distant, just a little distracted, just enough for her to feel safe. When she left, I took notes what she wore, how she smelled, where she said she'd been. I checked her stories against Mark's. Most of the time, they lined up, too perfectly. I installed a tracking app on Mark's phone while he slept. It took less than 4 minutes. The next day, while he was on a supposed business lunch, I watched his location ping from a downtown hotel not even 10 minutes from his office. He stayed there for almost 3 hours. I took a screenshot. That same night, he came home with flowers and told me he'd had a long day. I thanked him, put the bouquet in water, and kissed his cheek. It felt like performing CPR on something already cold. I knew I needed someone else who had reason to watch this fall with me. Someone who could help verify what I was seeing and feeling without adding confusion or questions. The only person who came to mind was Lauren Davis, a mutual friend from way back, someone who had grown distant from Tessa a few years ago after a business dispute. Lauren was smart, measured, and discreet. She ran a private event planning firm now and still had access to several of Tessa's usual vendors and clients. I invited her to coffee under the pretense of wanting to volunteer more with the local hospital board. 10 minutes in, I asked if she'd noticed anything off lately. Her eyes narrowed just slightly. I didn't give her the whole truth, not yet. But I mentioned that I had reason to believe Mark and Tessa were using events to meet privately, and I needed help confirming patterns, dates, overlaps, inconsistencies. Lauren didn't hesitate. She opened her tablet right there in the cafe and pulled up past bookings from Tessa's firm. As she scrolled, we noticed how many lunchtime walkthroughs fell during Mark's out-of-office windows. One Friday in particular stood out: Caraway Inn private meeting room, billed to a corporate account Tessa managed and scheduled at the exact time Mark's GPS showed he was stuck in traffic. Lauren tilted the screen toward me and said, "You want the rest of these sent somewhere?" I nodded and gave her the email to a new account I'd made just for this. From that point on, she started forwarding vendor invoices, florist orders, and even venue confirmations. Tessa hadn't bothered to hide well. I thanked her for her help and told her I owed her. She looked at me for a long second and said quietly, "Just don't let her get away with it." Back home, I opened the file on my laptop labeled Family Budget. I had used it for years to track bills, insurance, and emergency contacts. I created a second tab buried deeper and labeled it Contingency. In it, I tracked 3 columns: what I knew, what I could prove, what I was waiting for. It gave me clarity, gave me something to hold on to on the days the anger bubbled up so sharply I had to step outside just to breathe. Mark grew more confident as fall turned to early winter. He started talking about the possibility of taking Lily on a campus tour in the spring. Just the 2 of them, maybe a road trip. I nodded and told him it was a sweet idea. But later that night, I logged into my new account and reviewed the last batch of evidence Lauren had sent me. One entry caught my eye, a catering invoice under a fake client name, but with Tessa's initials at the bottom. The address matched a downtown loft that Mark had once shown me in passing, claiming it belonged to an old colleague. The delivery had taken place on the exact weekend he'd claimed to be in Nashville. I printed it and filed it away. One afternoon, I overheard Mark telling Lily he might have to miss her winter band concert. He mumbled something about a late client dinner. I smiled from the hallway and said, "That's all right, I'll be there." He nodded, not looking up from his phone. That was the moment I decided I wouldn't let this drag into spring. The longer I waited, the more risk there was that it would bleed into Lily's final year of high school. I wouldn't allow that. Whatever I did, it would be clean controlled and done before May. The school banquet was approaching, the one Lily had been looking forward to for weeks. It would be held at one of the newer event halls in town, and I'd already seen Tessa's name printed on the planning committee flyers. It was the kind of formal event she would treat as her personal stage. I knew the layout of that building. I knew where the AV equipment was stored, who had access to the controls, and how long it took for a presentation to be uploaded. I also knew exactly what I would be wearing that night. Every step I took after that was measured. No sudden moves, no phone calls from unknown numbers, no risky confrontations, just steady, careful planning. Mark still thought I was a little tired, a little distant but manageable. Tessa still texted me photos of color palettes and joked about her chaotic clients. Lily still hugged me goodnight and asked if we could go dress shopping soon. And I, the woman they had both dismissed and underestimated, quietly chose the exact time, place, and way I would reclaim the story. Because now, I wasn't grieving anymore. I was ready. The night of the banquet arrived with a sky full of winter stars, and just enough wind to make the hem of my dress move like it had purpose. Lily stood beside me in the mirror, adjusting the neckline of her emerald gown, her eyes shining the way they used to when she was little, and the world still felt full of magic. I helped her with her earrings, steadied her hand when the clasp slipped, and smiled when she said, "You look beautiful, Mom." I thanked her and told her the same. She didn't know it yet, but tonight wasn't just about her senior banquet. Tonight was the night everything changed. Mark drove us in his silver SUV, humming along to the radio, like he hadn't spent the last 6 months building a second life behind my back. He looked handsome, polished, the kind of man who could charm a room without trying. Tessa would be there already, no doubt directing staff and adjusting flower arrangements to hide her nerves. She didn't know I'd been in that venue 2 days earlier, coordinating with the AV technician uploading a short video file under the label End-of-Year Highlights. She didn't know the remote was hidden in the clutch resting calmly on my lap. The event hall was glowing when we arrived, soft gold lights strung overhead, round tables draped in navy linen music floating just loud enough to carry without interrupting conversation. I smiled, and greeted parents, teachers, even a few board members I hadn't seen since the fall fundraiser. Tessa spotted us and waved, gliding toward us in a navy jumpsuit that matched the decor too perfectly. She greeted Mark with a brief hug, one hand on his arm, too long, then turned to me. "You look incredible, Elena. Absolutely stunning." I smiled without blinking. "Thank you. You too?" We stood there for a moment, 3 people pretending, and then the crowd moved around us, and the performance went on. Dinner came and went. Lily sat with friends at the front, laughing and beaming in a way that made me ache and swell with pride all at once. Mark kept the wine flowing at our table, chatting easily with other parents, occasionally brushing my knee beneath the table, like he still thought he had that right. I let him. I let it all play out, because I needed the scene to look exactly how they wanted it remembered, until it didn't. The MC took the stage just after dessert, thanking the planning committee and inviting Tessa up to say a few words. She took the microphone with practiced ease, making jokes about Pinterest fails and last-minute RSVP changes. The room gave her polite laughs and soft applause. As she stepped down, the lights dimmed for the slideshow presentation, a look back at senior year. The screen read in cursive. Tessa gave me a small nod from across the room. I nodded back. The screen flickered once, then the images began. At first, it was exactly what they expected: photos of homecoming science fair's senior prank day. Smiles, music, nostalgia. Then the screen went black. For a full second, nothing. Just the soft hum of confused chatter. Then came the text messages. Mark still thinking about Friday. Same time next week, Tessa. Already looking forward to it. I'll bring the wine. She'll be at work late, right? Someone gasped. Someone else whispered. Wait, what is this? I pressed the remote again. The hotel invoices came next. Dates and times matching Mark's supposed travel schedule. Tessa's corporate logo on each receipt. Then the photos, side profiles blurred, but recognizable, of the 2 of them exiting the Caraway in arms, linked unaware of the camera across the street. The room had gone still. Then came the final clip. From our own living room. Tessa leaning across the couch, whispering something I'd memorized by now. Mark's hand on her knee, her voice clear and smug. She has no idea. The screen froze on that frame. There was no noise for a long moment, like the entire room had forgotten how to breathe. Then chairs shifted. A fork clattered against a plate. Mark turned to me, his face pale and confused. Elena, he started reaching for my hand. I pulled it back and stood. I wanted to take a moment. I said, my voice steady, calm, just loud enough to honor the truth. All eyes were on me. Behind me, the screen still glowed with their betrayal. To the families who showed up tonight with honesty, with integrity, thank you. To those who didn't, well, now you know who they are. Tessa had frozen halfway between the stage and her table, her eyes darting like a trapped animal. This is out of context, she stammered. This wasn't supposed to. Mark was still in his seat, blinking fast, trying to calculate what could be salvaged. Elena, please not here. Can we talk? No, I said, turning to face him fully. You've already done enough talking, behind my back, in my house, with someone who once sat across from our daughter and called herself family. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a folded envelope. Here's the finalized notice. As of this morning, your access to our joint accounts has been terminated. My lawyer will be in touch about the rest. I turned toward Tessa. And as for you, there's a reason none of your client payments cleared last week. Might want to check your accounts. Turns out some of your invoices came from businesses that don't exist. Fraud's a tricky thing when you leave a trail. I didn't need to say anything more. The damage was done. My goal was never to humiliate them for the sake of it. It was to make the truth undeniable, to end the performance on my terms. I walked off the stage without looking back. Lily was near the back of the room, her face confused and pale, but I met her gaze and gave her a small nod. She'd learn everything in time, but not tonight. Mark didn't follow me. Tessa didn't speak. I walked out into the cold air and exhaled so deeply it felt like I was letting go of 10 years in a single breath. Inside, their world had collapsed. Outside, mine had just begun again. By the time I woke the next morning, my phone had already buzzed 12 times. 4 missed calls from Mark. 2 from unknown numbers I didn't bother to answer. A text from Lauren that simply read, "You did it." I sat on the edge of the bed with the light just starting to warm the curtains, and for the first time in months, I felt still. Not vindicated, not proud, just still. Downstairs, the silence in the kitchen was different. It wasn't the silence of pretending or avoidance, it was the kind that follows a storm. I made coffee, slowly moving through my kitchen like it belonged to me again. Lily had slept at her best friend's house after the banquet. I knew there would be questions, but I also knew I could answer them now honestly, without fear of unraveling. Mark didn't come home that night, not the next day either. Instead, he sent a series of messages that swung between defensive and apologetic, angry and confused. He said we could fix it, that what I'd done was cruel, that I had humiliated him. Then he said he missed me. Then he went quiet. I sent him one reply. It was short, direct, and final. The divorce filing is already in motion. My lawyer will coordinate with yours. Do not contact me unless it pertains to Lily. Walter showed up on the 3rd morning after the banquet. I had expected him, though I wasn't sure what version of him I'd get, father or father-in-law. He stood on the porch, hat in hand, and I opened the door before he knocked. His face was lined in ways I hadn't noticed before, but his eyes held steady. "May I come in?" I nodded and stepped aside. He didn't sit, just stood in the middle of the living room, taking it in like he was memorizing something. "I won't pretend I knew what was going on," he said, "and I won't ask you to explain anything you don't want to." He looked at me then. "But I saw enough at that banquet to know you didn't do what you did lightly." I crossed my arms gently. "I didn't." Walter nodded. "Mark's staying at a motel near the office. He told me not to come here. Said you wouldn't want to see me." "He was wrong," I said quietly. He looked relieved. "I'll always be Lily's granddad, and if you'll let me, I'd like to keep showing up." I nodded. "You're welcome here, Walter." "Always have been." He left not long after, but not before, placing a small wrapped bundle on the counter. "Your mother's recipe for cornbread. I figured you'd want it back." That afternoon, I met with my attorney, a woman named Camille Reed, who had been recommended by Lauren's husband. Camille was sharp, clear-eyed, and didn't flinch when I handed her a folder labeled Timeline. Inside were copies of every text, hotel receipt, transaction, and still frame from the hidden camera footage. She flipped through it quickly, then closed the folder and met my eyes. "This is more than enough," she said. "You've built a clean, indisputable case. You'll get the house, your accounts, and likely full custody of Lily until she turns 18. Are you prepared for that kind of closure?" "I am," I said. "I'm just not sure Mark is." She smiled without warmth. "That's not your job anymore." Tessa, for her part, tried to fight back. I heard through Lauren that she had shown up to one of the venue contracts the following week and been told her services were no longer needed. One of her biggest clients, a local law firm that had hired her for every retreat for 6 years, dropped her without explanation. Lauren said she left the building in tears, face-tight, hands trembling. I didn't feel satisfaction, just a calm sense of distance, like watching something fade in the rear-view mirror. 2 weeks after the banquet, Lily came home early from school, her shoulders tense and her expression guarded. I was folding towels in the laundry room when she found me. "Can we talk?" she asked. I nodded and followed her to the back porch. She sat with her legs tucked under her, staring out at the winter bare trees. "I know something happened between you and Dad," she said. "I don't know all of it, and I don't think I want to. But I need to know, was I the only reason you stayed as long as you did?" I looked at her, my daughter, who had grown so much in the last year, and I told her the truth. "You were one of the reasons. But I also stayed because I believed for a long time that he could be better, that we were still worth saving." She was quiet a long time, then nodded. "Okay. And now?" she asked. "Now," I said, "I know we're worth more than being lied to." She didn't cry, and neither did I. But something settled between us, something quiet and steady. She leaned her head against my shoulder, and we stayed like that until the sun disappeared behind the trees. The following day, I boxed up the last of Mark's things. I left the box by the front door and sent him a message letting him know it would be out until Friday. He didn't reply. One by one, people began to shift around me. Neighbors who had once waved politely started asking if I needed anything. Teachers at school pulled me aside, whispering that they admired how I handled it all. Even Lily's guidance counselor called to say she had noticed a difference in her, calmer, more focused. But the message that stayed with me most came from an unexpected place. It was an email from a woman named Brenda Caldwell, a name I recognized but hadn't thought about in years. She'd been on a volunteer committee with Tessa once, someone I barely spoke to except in passing. Her message read, "Elena, I was at the banquet. I wanted to say thank you, not for the drama, but for the clarity. Some of us needed to see that the truth can be told, even when it's uncomfortable. You reminded me that it's never too late to stop pretending. Wishing you peace." I stared at the words for a long time before closing my laptop. It was happening slowly, quietly, my life reshaping itself. And soon, it would be entirely mine again. Spring came early that year. The trees along Sycamore Lane bloomed faster than usual, their blossoms spilling into the gutters and over front yards like the town had decided to start fresh with me. I spent more time outside planting herbs in the raised beds. Walter helped me repair, walking the long loop behind the middle school where Lily used to ride her bike in loops until dinner. Our house was quiet now, but it didn't feel empty. It felt clean. The divorce finalized without drama. Mark signed the papers 2 weeks after the financial mediation. No custody battle, no drawn-out bargaining. Just a few stiff emails and a silent acknowledgement that he had lost something he couldn't repair. I kept the house, the accounts, and most of all, my name untarnished. Mark moved into a 2-bedroom apartment near the highway. Walter told me he stopped by once, said very little, and then stopped calling. I didn't ask for more. Some things don't need rehashing. Tessa disappeared from the social circles almost overnight. Lauren later told me she shut down her event firm entirely, citing burnout in a final email to her clients. I saw her once, weeks after everything, outside a gas station. She was sitting alone in her car, engine running, staring straight ahead like she hadn't moved in a while. She didn't see me, and I didn't make myself seen. That moment belonged to her. Lily and I talked when she was ready. We sat on the porch one Saturday evening, the sky fading into soft pinks, and she asked all the questions that had been building quietly. I answered with honesty, not bitterness. She didn't cry, and neither did I. But when she reached for my hand halfway through, I knew we would be all right. Maybe better than before. I returned to work with a steadier mind. My students noticed. One of them, a senior named Julia, left a note on my desk that said, "You look lighter. Whatever you did, keep doing it." I smiled at that for days. Even small peace is visible when it finally arrives. Walter still visits every other Sunday. He brings sweet tea and fresh lemons, sits on the porch swing, and asks about Lily's scholarship options. He never mentions Mark now. I think he carries his own kind of grief about it, quiet and private. But I also think he's found a way to love us through it in his quiet, reliable way. Some nights, I still hear echoes of the woman I was during those months, the quiet pacing, the hidden tears, the long drives just to breathe. But they don't haunt me anymore. They remind me that survival isn't always loud. Sometimes it's measured and deliberate, like sewing a new seam along the edge of something torn. Looking back, I don't regret the way I chose to respond. Not once. I didn't scream or sabotage. I didn't drag Lily through it or give Mark more of my energy than he'd already taken. I let the truth speak for itself. I protected what mattered and let everything else fall where it needed to. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: dignity doesn't mean staying silent. It means knowing when to speak and how. It means defending your worth without losing your center. And most of all, it means letting go without letting yourself disappear. I don't need revenge anymore. I have my peace. I have my daughter. I have my home. And for the first time in a long time, I have myself fully, finally, and without apology. Before we close, I'd love to know which part of this journey spoke most to you. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. And if you'd like to hear more true family stories like this one, stay connected right here.